Welcome back. Chip Nellinger and Brian Grady joining us again. All right, Chip, inauguration set for Monday. Let's just say that Trump announces tariffs on day 2 of his administration. Do you think that takes the wind out of these markets, or do you think that is already baked in?
Well, I think a lot of it's baked in. I think it depends on obviously the response, right? Not so much the tariffs, but the response. I've said for a while that Brazil bean crop is big enough. China really doesn't have to buy any beans from us, tariffs or no tariffs. So I think it depends on whether they continue to take the beans that they've already bought and purchased. They have been recently buying beans. And before the break, Brian mentioned that there's some quality issues maybe in the wetter area of central northern Brazil. And so I think it's the response to the tariffs. I think immediately it might be seen as a little bit negative, but I think we've traded that. It probably depends on whether China washes out of a bunch of beans in retaliation on the purchases that they've made up to this point.
Hey, Brian, we are hearing some huge corn acreage estimates this year. And I don't know where Pro Farmer sets right now, but let's just say that we have 95 million plus acres of corn again. What would that do, or corn this year? What would that do to the market?
Well, first off, the market is trying to buy corn acres at the moment. So I think, corn is trying to buy acres not only from soybeans, cotton, spring wheat, you name it. The corn market is winning at the moment. And so if that changes or not into spring will be the big question. But if we do get, let's say, the number you threw out there, 95 million acres, I think that's probably high on corn at the moment. But if we would get there, then you're looking at a situation where we go from borderline tight on supplies as we move through the 24-25 marketing year here, the second half of it, to something that would be sufficient again as we move forward if we don't have some sort of a weather issue during summertime.
Yeah, Chip, you agree with that?
I do. I would agree. I think beans, since the USDA report last Friday, have made it a little more interesting. They kind of caught up to corn, but I think you'd have to push November beans up towards 1080, 1090, just shy of $11 to maybe swing a lot of those acres out of corn. But regardless of what the number is or the March intentions report, it's all about Mother Nature. You still have to raise the crop, and there's all kinds of questions and drought talk already about the U.S. Summer. So to me, it comes down to Mother Nature during the growing season.
Brian, the corn rally, we know that it can impact the feeder market with the prospect of rising feed cost. But is there any indication that the feeder market is set to top?
Well, what we know about the cattle market is very cyclical. What we've seen is the cycle highs have been extended longer than what is typical the last 2 times now, including the current time. And we also know that when major tops are put in the cattle market, that you see a pretty significant downside correction. So I think that we probably have a chance to move to all-time highs in the cattle market as we move into early 2025. Thereafter, a lot of it will depend on demand and therefore and how the market reacts to that, because demand is the key component. We know the supply side of things. The Mexican feeder cattle situation, we are going to see Mexican feeder cattle move back across the border here again pretty soon in all likelihood. And so you'll alleviate some of that, but we still have a supply issue in the United States. So this all comes down to demand, and on the feeder cattle side of things, it's how much the producer's willing to pay for those feeders to put into the feedlots.
Yeah, and we'll get an updated cattle inventory report at the end of the month. The assumption is we have not started to rebuild this cattle herd yet. But Chip, what do you think? Can we see higher cattle prices?
I do think so. I think if you look at a chart, technically they look a little bit toppy, but to Brian's point, you have to stay high enough, long enough to choke demand off. Now, there's some early indications that maybe the exports are starting to slow down, but domestic demand still looks pretty strong. So could you have a $10 break and then still move into new highs? Absolutely. I think the volatility is going to be head spinning, just make people's head spin in the cattle and feeder market. Not so sure we've topped. I think technically you need a correction, but until you choke demand off, I don't think you've solved the problem with that tight supply.
Interesting. Yeah, and we'll have much more cattle talk as we are at a cattle convention coming up at the 1st of February. All right, Chip, Brian, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. We need to take a quick break, and then we are checking in with Machinery Pete next.